My affair turned my husband into a stranger when my husband, Alex, and I got married 9 years ago. I thought we were living the perfect love story. He wasn't just my partner, he was my best friend, my biggest cheerleader, and the love of my life. We had dreams of a life filled with happiness, family, and adventures. For a while, we were that couple everyone admired, inseparable, supportive, and deeply in love. Alex had always been everything I wanted in a partner: kind, attentive, and hardworking. We shared dreams of building a family, traveling the world, and growing old together. I felt safe with him, knowing he would stand by me no matter what. In the early years of our marriage, Alex went out of his way to make me feel cherished. Sweet notes on the fridge, surprise dates, and hours of heartfelt conversations were his way of showing love. Even when his job as a consultant required him to be away for weeks, I trusted him completely and looked forward to our reunions. But 3 years ago, I made a devastating, selfish choice that shattered the foundation of everything we had built together. Looking back, I see how blind I was. Alex was everything I ever wanted, but I allowed insecurities and doubts to cloud my judgment. By the time I realized how much he truly meant to me, it was too late. The early bliss, the beginning of our relationship, feels like a distant, beautiful dream. Alex had a way of making me feel like the most important person in the world. We would stay up late, sharing our hopes and fears. He made me believe that no matter what life threw at us, we'd face it together. Even though Alex's work often kept him away, our love felt unshakable. We made the most of our time together, planning future vacations and dreaming about the family we wanted to create. I felt proud of his ambition and determination. He worked tirelessly to build a stable future for us, even if it meant spending weeks away from home. For a while, the excitement of his return after each trip kept me going. We would reconnect over cozy dinners and lazy weekends, our bonds seemingly unbreakable. But as the years passed, the constant separations began to wear me down. The cracks began to show. Things started to change when Alex's work trips became longer and more frequent. Weeks turned into months, and our time together began to feel like stolen moments. I found myself sitting alone at the dinner table, staring at his empty chair, wondering if this was how our marriage would always be. When we decided to start a family, I hoped it would bring us closer. I pictured Alex being more present, helping me with the pregnancy and sharing in the joy of becoming parents. But reality was much harsher. Pregnancy was exhausting. Between the morning sickness, hormonal changes, and endless doctor's appointments, I felt like I was carrying the weight of it all alone. Alex tried to support me as best he could through phone calls and video chats, but it wasn't the same. I needed him physically and emotionally, and he wasn't there. The temptation of comfort during this difficult time, I grew close to Lisa, a coworker who seemed to understand my struggles. At first, I saw her as nothing more than a friend, a kind, supportive presence who listened when I vented about my loneliness and frustrations. But Lisa began planting seeds of doubt about Alex's faithfulness. Her offhand comments like, "Do you really think he's not tempted being away so much?" stuck with me. She'd suggest that most men in Alex's position would struggle to stay loyal. Her words fed the insecurities that had been bubbling beneath the surface. I started imagining scenarios where Alex was unfaithful, convincing myself he might betray me. This doubt pushed me further away from him and closer to Lisa. Crossing the line, what began as innocent conversations with Lisa soon became something deeper. I started confiding in her about things I hadn't even told Alex, my fears, frustrations, and doubts about our marriage. She didn't offer reassurance. Instead, she encouraged me to focus on my own happiness. One evening, after a particularly emotional argument with Alex over the phone, Lisa invited me over for drinks. I went, thinking it would be a harmless distraction. But as the night went on, the lines blurred. We shared more than just words that night, and by morning, I knew I had crossed a boundary I could never uncross. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal of everything Alex and I had built together. The affair continued in secret for months. Every time I was with Lisa, I felt a mix of guilt and justification. I told myself that Alex's absence was to blame, that if he had been there for me, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was running from my insecurities and fears, not from Alex. The birth of Emily in early 2020. Our daughter Emily was born. The world was already on the brink of change as the pandemic swept across the globe. For the first time in years, Alex was forced to stay home. Watching him with Emily was both beautiful and heartbreaking. He was everything I had once dreamed of in a partner and a father, patient, loving, and completely devoted. Seeing him rock her to sleep and sing her lullabies made me realize just how wrong I had been. Lisa's poisonous words about Alex being unfaithful felt like lies in hindsight. He wasn't the distant, unfaithful man I had convinced myself he was. He was simply a hard-working husband doing his best to provide for our family. The weight of my guilt became unbearable. Every time Alex looked at me with love, I felt like a fraud. I couldn't keep the secret any longer. The confession one night, after putting Emily to bed, I sat Alex down and told him everything. My voice trembled as I admitted, "I've been unfaithful. It was a terrible, selfish mistake. I'm so sorry." At first, he stared at me, disbelief written all over his face. Then his expression turned cold. "Is Emily mine?" he asked, his voice like a dagger. I promised she was and offered to take a paternity test to prove it. He didn't say another word. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. He stayed in the nursery with Emily, while I lay awake, knowing I had destroyed the man I loved. Living with the consequences in the weeks that followed, Alex became a stranger. He stopped looking at me, speaking to me only when necessary. Even after the paternity test confirmed Emily was his, the trust was gone. I tried everything: letters, counseling, pleas for forgiveness. But nothing worked. The man who had once been my best friend and biggest supporter was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't bear to be near me. Eventually, Alex moved into the guest bedroom. He poured all his love into Emily, while I watched from the sidelines, knowing I was the reason for his pain. Reflection and regret. 3 years later, we're still married, but our relationship is a shadow of what it once was. Alex is an incredible father, but the warmth between us is gone. Not a day goes by that I don't regret my choices. I think about the life we could have had if I hadn't let my insecurities take over. I've tried to make amends, but I know some wounds never heal. I quit my job to remove myself from the environment that led to my betrayal. I blocked Lisa on every platform and cut off all contact with her. It was a small sacrifice in the face of the pain I had caused Alex, but even these efforts couldn't undo the damage. Alex told me once, "I'm not divorcing you, but this marriage isn't what it was." His words haunt me. All I can do now is focus on being the best mother I can be and hope that one day Alex will see how much I still love him. But deep down, I fear the truth. Some mistakes can't be undone. Some wounds never heal. In trying to mend the pieces of my broken marriage, I've learned a painful lesson. Trust, once shattered, is almost impossible to rebuild. And now, I live every day knowing that I was the one who tore us apart. I'm not leaving. We're fine. His words should have comforted me. They should have been a balm to my battered heart, a reassurance that no matter how far we had fallen, he was still here, still willing to stay. But the way he said it, with such flatness, such an utter lack of emotion, made my stomach churn. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like staying was an obligation, not a choice. The warmth that had once defined our relationship was gone, replaced by a cold indifference that left me feeling hollow. No matter what I did, I couldn't bring it back. His words, meant to reassure, instead felt like a slap in the face. They were a reminder of what we had lost: the trust, the connection, the bond that once held us together. It had all been shattered, and no amount of pleading or sacrifice seemed enough to fix it. Still, I was determined to try. I told myself that love could conquer anything, that if I worked hard enough, I could earn back his trust, his affection, and the relationship we once had. So I threw myself into being the best wife and mother I could possibly be. Desperate measures, I started cooking his favorite meals, recipes I hadn't made in years. I even learned a few new ones, convinced that a home-cooked dinner might reignite some semblance of connection. I made sure I always looked my best when he came home from work. I wore the perfume he used to love, styled my hair the way he once said made me beautiful, and kept our house spotless and inviting. Every small gesture was deliberate. Every action was meant to say, "I'm here. I love you. I'm fighting for us." But no matter what I did, he remained distant. At first, I told myself it was just going to take time. Healing wasn't instant, after all. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. But as the weeks turned into months, his indifference only seemed to grow. The new normal, the emotional distance between us was painful enough, but soon it became physical too. He stopped sleeping in our bed, moving instead to the nursery under the guise of looking after our child. At first, I didn't question it. I told myself it was temporary, that he just needed some space. But as the night stretched on, the empty space beside me in our bed began to feel like a gaping chasm. It wasn't just the lack of his presence, it was what it symbolized. Every night I lay there alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering where we had gone wrong. His affection disappeared entirely. He stopped kissing me, stopped holding me, stopped even brushing against me in passing. It was as though I had become invisible to him. When I tried to initiate intimacy, he'd pull away or make excuses. He was tired, or stressed, or just not in the mood. Sometimes, he wouldn't even bother with an excuse. He'd simply lie there, detached, waiting for me to give up. Before everything fell apart, we had been inseparable. We weren't just partners, we were best friends. We shared everything: our dreams, our fears, our inside jokes. He used to text me just to say he loved me, to call me when he was away because he missed the sound of my voice. But now, all of that was gone. No more surprise flowers. No more playful teasing. No more spontaneous date nights. The man who had once made me feel like the center of his universe now barely looked at me. It was like living with a stranger, someone who looked like my husband, but wasn't him. A glimmer of hope. Nearly a year passed, and I reached my breaking point. The silence, the distance, the emptiness, it had become unbearable. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. So I decided to confront him. One night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table in yet another oppressive silence, I mustered the courage to ask him how he really felt. "Do you even want to be here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Do you even want to fix this?" To my surprise, he didn't dismiss me. He didn't get angry or defensive. Instead, he said something I hadn't expected. "I'm willing to try." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise that things would get better. But it was something, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped us for so long. Baby steps in the weeks that followed. There were small signs of progress. He started sleeping in our bed again, though he still kept his distance. He didn't initiate physical contact, but he no longer pulled away when I hugged or kissed him. For our anniversary, he even planned a night out, something he hadn't done in years. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was an effort, and that meant something. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. Reality sets in, but that hope was short-lived. When we were intimate for the first time in months, I realized just how far we still had to go. What I had hoped would feel like a reconnection instead felt hollow. There was no passion, no tenderness, just a mechanical act that left me feeling emptier than before. I told myself it was just the beginning, that things would get better with time. But they didn't. The physical intimacy we once shared never returned. He didn't touch me the way he used to. He didn't look at me with love or desire. It felt like he was going through the motions out of obligation rather than any real longing for me. It was devastating. The breaking point one Saturday night, I decided to go out with friends. It was something I hadn't done in ages, and I hoped it might help me feel like myself again, the woman I used to be before everything fell apart. I put on his favorite dress and styled my hair the way he liked. A small part of me hoped he might notice, might see me the way he once did. When he saw me, his response shattered me. "Do you have a date tonight or something?" he asked, his tone cold and dismissive. I froze, stunned. After everything I had done to prove my love, he still doubted me. "How can you even say that?" I asked, my voice breaking. His response was like a knife to the heart. "Well, it didn't stop you before, so why would it stop you now?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The accusations, the cruelty, it was too much. I didn't go out that night. Instead, I stayed home, crying in the dark, wondering if things would ever get better. Reflections and regrets in the days that followed, I found myself spiraling into a sea of self-doubt and regret. I replayed his words over and over, wondering if this was my punishment, if I deserved this for the mistakes I had made. I thought about everything that had brought us to this point, the lies, the betrayal, the broken trust. I couldn't change the past, but I was desperate to fix the present. I loved my husband more than anything, but love alone wasn't enough. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. He said he had forgiven me, but his actions told a different story. He wasn't the same man I had fallen in love with, and I wasn't sure if he ever would be. I missed the way he used to look at me. I missed the little gestures, the way he'd surprise me with my favorite coffee, the way he'd hold my hand just because he could. I missed the man who made me feel like I was the center of his world. But I also knew I couldn't keep begging for his forgiveness. Where do we go from here? I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make him see that I'm still the woman he fell in love with. I don't know if we can ever get back to what we once had. All I know is that I can't keep living like this in a marriage that feels like it's falling apart at the seams. I want to believe we can make it through this, that we can rebuild our love and trust. But what if we've already passed the point of no return? I love him. I always will. But I can't fix this alone. Closing remarks. Thank you for watching this video. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Share it with someone who might relate. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think broken trust can ever truly be repaired? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, we're all in this together.